tonight. So we're also streaming this live to the website at lincolnproject.us/live. I just want to say a quick word of thanks for joining us. We've been doing smaller events, local virtual events in our target states around the country, and also some private virtual events with some supporters of the Lincoln Project. But this is our first national town hall that we've opened up to the public, and we want to say hello to as many of you as we can and answer as many of your questions as we can. So everyone here is really excited to meet you. Tonight we have independent political consultant and captain of this ship, Reed Galen. How you doing, Reed? Communication strategist and former chair of the New Hampshire Republican Party, Jennifer Horn. Hello, Jennifer. Hi. Republican strategist and former political director of the California Republican Party, Mike Madrid. Mike, say hello. Mike's frozen. Mike needs to work on his Wi-Fi. And veteran ad maker and author of the New York Times bestselling book, Everything Trump Touches Dies, Rick Wilson. How you doing, Rick?
Hey, everybody.
Hey. And national political strategist who's worked with George W. Bush, Senator John McCain, Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, Steve Schmidt. How you doing, Steve?
Good to be with you, Ron.
Hey. And Steve has the best background of the night. So tonight we're going to spend as much time as we can answering your questions. But before we dive in, we're going to do some quick updates on a number of different topics here. And Reed, I'd love it if you could kick us off here and just sort of set the table and tell folks why we're here tonight and why the Lincoln Project exists, and sort of take us from launch date to today, if you could.
Sure. And I'll make this brief because I know there's lots of folks with questions. And let me just say before anything else, I'm sitting here and I'm watching the chat as it climbs from 1,000 to 1,200. Everybody's saying hello. And I think I could not, if you had told us 6 months ago that we would be sitting here with 10,000, 20,000 people, you know, all dialed in for the same mission, like I wouldn't have believed you. And to watch this, hello from New Zealand. All right, you can't vote, but we're glad to have you. Like, it's an amazing thing. And it wouldn't be possible without y'all. All of you make this possible. There are folks you see on this screen, but the things that we are able to do on a daily basis, a weekly basis, and ultimately all the way through Election Day are only possible because of the support of folks like you who individually help us, whether or not that's volunteering, whether or not that's financially, whether or not that's helping us spread our message on Twitter or through the earned media. And so I will just say that, you know, the last 2 months for the Lincoln Project have been an incredible experience. We started in late December where, you know, we came together as a group and said, you know, there's a way that I think, you know, former Republicans, conservatives can take President Trump to task for the way that he has conducted himself. I think that when we started, this was about saving the republic from Donald Trump. As we moved into the horror that is COVID and now mass unemployment, we see that this is really about how consequences stem from political decisions. And some of those are life and death decisions. And now, as we've seen the unrest this summer and the president's perfect willingness to incite those things rather than heal the country, we see that this is really distilled down to a question of right or wrong, good and bad, darkness and light. And what way do we want to take this country? And which way do we all want to participate in that fight? And from our perspective, I think the first step in that movement, the first step in being able to take that path, you know, 90 degrees, maybe 180 degrees from where we are today, is to defeat Donald Trump on November 3rd. And so we work hard every day, understand that there's no complacency on anybody on this team or anybody else. There never will be. We will run through the tape on November 3rd, and the mission of the Lincoln Project is not over until Joe Biden takes the oath of office on January 20th, 2021. And so I just want to say thank you to all of the folks who've joined us tonight. I know there's probably a lot of folks with questions, and I want to get to that. And Ron, I don't know if I turn it back to you or to Steve, but thank you everybody for being here, and I couldn't be more excited.
Thanks, Reed. Yeah. All right. Very quickly, let's go to Steve. If you could just give everybody a wide-angle view of the presidential race as it stands today, as we see it, that'd be great.
Well, I think, Ron, good evening, and thank you all for joining us and for your support of the Lincoln Project. I think, broadly speaking, that this presidential election is the most consequential one the country has faced since the election of 1864, which determined whether we would remain a country or not. During the Second World War, one of FDR's close confidants was the Canadian Prime Minister, Mackenzie King. And Mackenzie King would be a guest at the White House with some frequency at FDR's invitation. And they were talking late into the night, and FDR was describing to him what would become the contours and the architecture and the design of the post-World War II US-led liberal global order that secured free trade, the decolonialization, the liberalization of world markets, a rule and law-based system after the horror and tragedy of the Second World War. And as FDR talked into the night, Mackenzie King later noted that FDR's ambition was not that this would last forever, but only that it would last for as long as everybody who was alive on the day that the war was won, that the day that World War II ended was still alive. And we're about there. And we're at a moment that I think represents a hinge of history. And I think that though he has been a vile, inept, and incompetent president, nobody should underestimate the consequences of the Donald Trump presidency. He has brought the country to a point of weakness in 3.5 short years that heretofore was unimaginable. The man who said that he alone could fix our problems and that he alone would make America great again has proven to be the worst president in the history of the Republic, presiding over a season of mass death. More than 40 million Americans looking for work. Our men and women unprotected from the bounties of a hostile foreign power at the direction of a retired KGB officer that's the head of its thugocracy and kleptocracy that the president refuses to condemn. We see encroachments on freedom and liberty all around the world. We see a rescission of democratic values, and we see no assertion of the imperfect yet perfectly noble American ideal anywhere in the world. We see corruption and malfeasance at home, and we see failure at a leadership level, at a probity and rectitude level, unlike anything we have ever seen in the long life of this country. And this man must be defeated, because we have no chance as a country of recovering from this low and vile moment until he is gone, until he is removed from office and the movement that he leads is repudiated. And last thought about the country, which is this. We're the only country in the history of the world that's made up of an idea, that's built on an ideal. That ideal has been imperfect through our history. It hasn't been applied equally to all of the people, but over time we've come to understand that all men being created equal and endowed by their creator with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as the goals of a life are for everybody. And when we think about this moment in time, and we think about Donald Trump's blood and soil nationalism, it's an affront to an Americanism that should not be in decline and retreat because of a con man from New York City. And so we're in the fight. You know, all of us feel privileged to be in it. We hope all of you do. You know, we're not all called to moments of equal importance over the history of the country, but for sure we're an important one where to be able to participate in the life of the nation and the great debate that's happening in this country should be regarded by all who get to partake in it in this free country as a great privilege, and one that we need to defend, because in the end, we're custodians and stewards of an American tradition that requires us to hand off the country stronger, freer, and closer to its idea and ideal than it was when we were born. And that's the work we're engaged in here. And we thank you very much for being part of it as Donald Trump is on his way to defeat and ignominy as a failed one-term president who has disgraced and desecrated his office for 4 years, that will be repudiated, removed, and fired by the American people. Thank you, Ron.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate that. Jennifer, could you talk to us a little bit about the importance of flipping the Senate this year. There's, we're focused on defeating Trump and Trumpism at the ballot box. So the president isn't the only target this year. We're also focused on the Senate. Can you explain to folks why that is?
Of course, I'm just so happy to have so many folks with us. Thank you to everybody for taking the time to be here tonight. And to Steve's point, this is such an important fight that we're all engaged in. I'm here because as much as I'm a politician or a communications, whatever, I'm here primarily because I'm a mom and I don't want my grandchildren to have to fight this fight again after I'm gone. That's why it is so important that we defeat not just Donald Trump, but Trumpism at the ballot box in November of this year. And so what does that mean? It means that all of those folks in the US Senate who had the moral and constitutional authority to hold this president in check and chose not to do so have also got to be defeated. It is not enough just to send Donald Trump on his way. We cannot have a Republican Party that in 2024 and in every cycle beyond that looks back and thinks that running as the Trump candidate is the path to success. We have got to send a loud, clear message to the entire party that Trumpism in its entirety is rejected, not just by a couple of us here, sitting together on this call, but by the entirety of the American people. And the only way that that happens is with a resounding loss right down the ballot at the ballot box on election day. And believe me, I say that with great great sadness as much as anything else. I've spent my entire adult life, advancing Republicans, helping Republicans getting elected, trying to advance the principles of Republicanism, equality, opportunity for all. Those ideals that Abraham Lincoln so eloquently espoused, and saw for the future of this country. That is not the Republican Party that we live with today. Those are not the principles that this party advances today. And it might be different if there was a loud, clear opposition voice to this president somewhere in the party, but there isn't. It's nowhere to be seen. Not in Congress, not in state committees, not in, not from the base or the activists. That voice has to be heard. And more important than anything else, I think to me, and I assume to everybody else on this call, is that when generations, ahead look back at this moment, that they see clearly that the historic record is clear where we stood and what we believed in and what we fought for. That's why we're all here together. That's why it's so important that we be successful, not just in the White House, but in the Senate as well.
Yeah. Thanks, Jennifer. And speaking of the Senate and the presidential race, Mike Madrid, how's your Wi-Fi doing?
It's holding up. I know it's freezing up a little bit. So I apologize if it gets shaky.
No, not at all. Cool. All right. So could you walk us through a quick update on the numbers, swing states and presidential states, Senate states that we're targeting, and sort of give us the lay of the land here?
Yeah, let me be, I'll be as brief as I can. We could spend obviously a ton of time on going through the numbers, and I don't think that that's probably the right place to do it right now. Sure. Let me start by saying this. The environment that we are in right now in early July is 180 degrees different than when we began this project back in November, December of last year. At that time, we were heading into the impeachment hearings. The Republican base was overwhelmingly consolidated. The U.S. Senate, with one notable example, was lockstep behind the President of the United States. It seemed like there was this impenetrable wall of republicanism that the 8 of us who decided to make this leap were convinced. We were convinced that we could break through this. Now, I'm not going to suggest at all ever that any of the outside circumstances were any of our doing, but the opportunity in a campaign is to take advantage of the opportunities as they come. And the environment is so significantly different that we have had to make both tactical and strategic changes as we've gone along. So when back in January, this was sizing up to look very similarly to a traditional Florida, Ohio, Pennsylvania sort of electoral college strategy, electoral race. The map, again, because of the softness in the Republican base, what we call the Lincoln Project effect, the poking and prodding that our ads and our communications work has done has opened up a number of demographic opportunities, which is in many ways kind of unprecedented, certainly in this time. Now, keep in mind, this president hasn't been tested really by anything of great consequence in 3.5 years. This is his first test and he is failing it. And across all Republican segments, that incompetence, that mismanagement, that lack of ability to handle a sizable event that's facing the nation is what is causing the erosion amongst everything from college-educated Republicans to seniors 65 and older to even white evangelicals and now non-college educated white voters. So there's a hemorrhaging that is taking place. And what has happened is the field for the Electoral College and the Senate map has expanded considerably. A couple of caveats. Whenever we talk about this stuff on Twitter, the first thing is people get nervous and say, don't get complacent, don't get complacent. I assure you, having worked with this band of warriors for the past few months, there is nothing complacent about this group. We don't even view that we've gotten started yet, okay? We're just warming up. These are warm-up pitches, okay? So we're not complacent. We're just getting going. That's first. And the other, of course, is we are looking at polling very differently. What we're really looking for is fluidity and movement in the numbers, okay? The horse race polls, you can, and many of you will, drive yourself crazy over the next 100 days. Who's ahead? So-and-so's 2 points closer than they were. What does that mean? Is the world coming to an end? That's not at all what we're looking for, okay? That's not the way that we approach the race. What we're looking for is where there are movements and where there are small or big shifts in public opinion. And because of the flexibility and the creativity that this team has, the ability to capitalize that, bracket where we need to, or move offensively where we need to. So real quickly, let me wrap it up by saying where this, I think we entered this race looking at the Florida, Wisconsin, Ohio model. There are races that are showing tremendous opportunities, like in Arizona, for example, right? I think we're looking at Arizona saying that's a possibility. North Carolina is a lot softer than I think we were 4 or 5 months ago. We're not going to jump into so many of the other far-reaching states. The goal here is to win. 270 is a win. Whether you get 270 or 400, you still just have one person being sworn in. And the roadmap to 270 is what we are singularly focused on. If opportunities open up beyond that, we'll take those opportunities. But the magic number is 270. We feel we've got a very, very solid map to get there. We've got the fundamentals working for us, recognizing the art of campaigns is adjusting with what will inevitably big changes in the next 100 days. So I'll leave it with that, Ron.
Yeah, no, thank you, Mike. Your video froze up for a minute, but we heard you loud and clear. So you might want to try and reset that for us. Speaking of our ads, Rick, would you mind talking about maybe take a couple of your favorite, most recent ads and talk to us about what they were designed to do? Because we get a lot of questions about like who's the audience here, what are you trying to achieve, and maybe you can just give folks a high-level overview of our media strategy. Oh, unmute.
You think at this point on Zoom, I would know.
I know, after as many.
Yeah,
Zoom
usually making noise isn't Rick's problem.
Well, folks, first off, let me just thank everyone for joining us tonight. We've got our Zoom is maxed out. There's 10,000 people on here. Last I looked, about 12,000 on the YouTube channel and others following on the website. And I just cannot express to you enough our appreciation for the national movement that has formed around this effort. When we started this, as both Reed and Jennifer and Mike and Steve all said, it was a small band of pirates, and we looked at the landscape and said, we're going to do whatever we can. We don't know how big it can get. We don't know how far it can go. But with the help of millions of people out there, and with the help of folks at the grassroots who have joined us on this campaign, both as folks who amplify our social media, folks who have donated money. The average donation to the Lincoln Project has been $41. It is a real sign this is a national movement. We've got millions of people who are engaging with our content, which is how campaigns work now. The old model of, it's direct mail and TV and door knocking has all been thrown out the window. Between modernized campaigns and COVID, we are in a very different world now. And because of the tens of thousands of people like you, we have been able to get in that fight and effectively become a powerful force in this election. we've been able to take your energy and the messages that need to be heard by 3 big tiers of voters and get them out there. And I'm going to explain to you guys, it's secret, so don't tell Donald Trump, okay? There are 3 basic types of communications efforts we engage in. The first part is what we excel at every day. And those are the things that get into Donald Trump's tiny little brain and drive him out of his mind. And we don't do that just to troll Donald Trump. As amusing as trolling is, it's not why we do it. We do it because when Donald Trump is obsessed about an ad that we've made or an issue that we've made him think about, he loses control of his campaign, sometimes for a day, sometimes for a week, sometimes for 10 days. Donald Trump spent 15 minutes in his Tulsa disease rally reenacting his heroic walk down the ramp and his heroic drinking of water because we rattled his cage on it with ads and social media. So that first column of ads, messing with Trump, it isn't just for the purposes of trolling. We are doing it for a strategic campaign reason, and we know one thing about Donald Trump. He can never take his eyes off the work we do. His people are obsessed about it in ways that when this is all over, we're going to have some great stories for you folks because they cannot stop worrying about us, thinking about us. And everybody who's helped us has built this machine that we're privileged to be at the steering toward the defeat of Donald Trump that has effectively done the thing that no one else ever did to him. We checked his shit. We got in his head. We have rattled him, and he knows it. His campaign knows it. We know it, and now you know it. The second tier of ads we do are to litigate the case against Donald Trump. We are talking to Americans about the real country we're seeing in front of us right now as we're trying to face up to a pandemic that Donald Trump absolutely could have done more to prevent. He lied and deceived this country for months on end, and now we're paying the price, both in the humanitarian cost and in the economic collapse we're experiencing. So we're litigating that case in the key swing states. As Mike said, this is a ball game with the Electoral College. It's the only game in town this year, so we're going to fight every day to win it. We're going to do everything we can to ensure that Donald Trump cannot snatch the states that he won last time: Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Florida, North Carolina. We're going to work every day to take that electoral pathway of his and make it more and more narrow. And the efforts that we're doing with that litigation column of ads are very important in educating the swing voters that we've identified out there, that we know are out there in the states, talking to those folks, making sure they have an understanding that they don't have to choose Donald Trump, that they have got a case they can make to themselves, to their families, to their friends, to their Facebook followers, that this is why I've walked away from Trump. Now, we know who those people are. One thing you see about the Lincoln Project is that we are an iceberg. The thing you see up on the top are us scrapping with Donald Trump in some of these ads. What you don't see is we've been identifying voters in the key swing states. We've been modeling this out so that when we do go out to the third column of our strategic messaging, which is persuading those voters to make the jump, get out there, cast their ballot by mail. And by the way, tell all your Republican friends that voting by mail is very, very bad. Just like the president said, they don't have to vote by mail or at all, as far as we're concerned. But this entire operation is predicated on building out a meaningful sized ability to keep producing great content, to keep driving great messages, to do organizing in the states. One thing that we didn't expect coming into this at all, and Jennifer and Mike could speak to this extensively, when we came into this, we didn't think we'd be doing a lot of grassroots outreach and a lot of one-on-one, old-fashioned political touch work. Well, we've got almost 3,000 volunteers in Michigan alone who want to get out there and get in this fight. And we've got thousands and thousands of volunteers coming online in all these other states that are going to be a very effective part of this mechanism, of this campaign, of this effort. So we are building out a national movement. It's not just going to be, clever ads banging away at Trump. We're going and doing a full spectrum warfare operation against this guy from top to bottom. We're doing everything we can. The support of folks like you has been vital to this. We are so grateful every day. We are so thankful every day that you've put the fuel in the tank of this rocket, and we are racing toward defeating Donald Trump this fall. And with that, I'll turn it back to Ron, and we'll get to some questions.
Thanks, Rick. Yeah, it's truly been astounding to see the outpouring of support and the numbers of folks that are interested in support of what we're doing. We're still at maximum capacity on Zoom, and we probably will be for this entire event. There's a little over 10,000 people consistently with us, and we're also trying to get Steve back on and Mike back on, but Zoom can't handle more than 10,000 people, so we might be having some issues getting them back on. So I know that CJ is working frantically behind the scenes here to try and get them joined again. But in the meantime, we're going to go straight to questions, and we're going to spend the rest of this call up until the very end on questions. I do need to just let everybody know that the Lincoln Project is recording this call, and excerpts of it could appear in the news media. So with that, I'd like to go to, we got Mike back. All right. I'd like to go to Andrew first, or both. CJ, could you see if you could get Andrew on if he's still, there he is. Hey, Andrew, if you can unmute yourself, we should be able to hear you. There should be a mute button in the bottom left corner of your, there you go.
Hey, good evening. I was working on another project and didn't know I was going live here.
Well, there you go. You're on. So you're in the hot seat now. How you doing?
Good. I appreciate you guys calling me in. My question was pretty much, is it too soon to sort of get excited? Is the light at the tunnel, at the end of the tunnel, actually a light, or is it the proverbial train that's coming? What do you think could sort of undermine the momentum that we're seeing now between now and November?
Yeah, great question. To anybody?
Yeah, go for it, Rick.
Yeah.
Look,
and by the way, if you're not speaking, if you guys could mute, I think we got a little bit of an echo. I don't know who it was. But
the reason we get up every day and push 20 hours a day is because you cannot ever take your foot off the gas with this guy. You cannot rest. You cannot blink. You cannot rely on the good offices of anybody else. You have to be ready to get up every morning and kick the hell out of Donald Trump's team and kick the hell out of Donald Trump. And we're going to have to probably fight this until the moment Joe Biden puts his hand on that Bible and swears the oath of office. So we want to always encourage people to never take anything for granted. You're in this fight. We're in this fight till the last dog dies. We are not going to stop. You cannot rely on momentum or polls because, as you know, President Hillary Clinton has regretted that decision extensively. We will not make that mistake, and we encourage none of you to make that mistake. Don't look at a good poll and say, "Hey, wow, it's done, it's over. I can rest now." You got to get up every day and stay in this fight all the time.
Yeah, and I would just say that this is a guy who spent the last 70-some years failing up. He's the luckiest, you know what, to probably ever walk the face of the earth, let alone the United States. And so, from our perspective, it ain't over until Biden is in the Oval Office, and we will continue to believe that. If we show a lot of energy and enthusiasm, that's because we feel it from y'all and we feel the momentum, rising. But please don't ever mistake that for overconfidence. We totally understand. Look, we're up against the president of the United States, a sitting president, and $1 billion worth of him and all his friends and everybody else. And so there's not a day to waste, and there's not a day to say, oh, you know what, I think I can take it easy today.
Yeah. CJ, let's see if we can go next to Kyle Lehner or Lehner. I'm not sure how you say his name. If we could get him on the line. And just so everyone knows, you can feel free to hit the Q&A button in your Zoom panel to ask a question. But we're trying to take a few of the folks who have emailed in questions ahead of time who have also been able to join the meeting first. We've got a few more of those, and then later on we'll take some other impromptu Q&As. Steve, I'm glad you could make it back.
A little Zoom difficulty, but
little Zoom difficulties. That's what happens when you.
I was able to navigate it with the help of a 14-year-old. So
when you max out the system. Okay, so I'm just seeing that Kyle's Zoom is an old version, and so we can't bring him online. But I'm going to read this question for Kyle, which is, how do we most effectively offer our friends who voted Trump in 2016 an honorable off-ramp? is it enough to tell them that it's not hypocritical to vote Biden and complain about his policy for the next 4 years? Anyone want to
Well,
take? Yeah.
so I think that you should not shame and guilt people into feeling badly about a decision that's irrevocable, right? It's an argument that's over. We're not ever going back in time 4 years. All that matters is the next vote. And, look, there's a lot of people who did a business deal with Donald Trump and they trusted him and he betrayed them. He's betrayed anyone he's ever been in business with, including the whole of the American people and all the people that voted for him. And there's nothing wrong with those people who trusted Donald Trump. It's Donald Trump's abuse of their trust is what's wrong. And so, at the end of the day, politics is a game of addition, not of subtraction. And so if you think it's right that the American president should be limp, impotent, weak, and flaccid when the Russians put bounties on American forces, right? Pay blood money to kill them, right? That's not okay. That's what we got in there right now. So he's a threat to our system, to our institutions. He's assailed the Constitution. He's divided the American people. And we can't endure 4 more years of this as a country without being unable to recover from the decline. And so we have just a hugely important moment coming. And what I would urge everybody to do is just ask the old Ronald Reagan question: are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? And unless you're a Trump kid, I think that's hard to answer in the affirmative. We'll have 200,000 dead Americans by the time we get to the election, and the country will suffer more. And we have no chance of recovering till we get them out of there. We got to get them out of there.
Yeah. Hey, Jennifer, this is an important question, and you have a unique perspective on this. And we just recorded a podcast about holding conservative values and reconciling those with voting for Donald Trump. So I wonder if you could speak to Kyle's question and what might you tell him to tell his friends, or how to communicate with his friends about how to give his Trump supporting friends and family, his network, an off-ramp?
Well, sure. In addition to the very eloquent response that Steve just gave us, I think because obviously I have a wide circle of Republican friends. I spent a lot of years as chairman and involved directly in the party. And this is an easy conversation, frankly, for me to have with my Republican associates. There is nothing conservative about Donald Trump. He's not a conservative. He's not a Republican. I mean, first of all, he is, has a traitor to the flag. When you think about what Steve just talked about, just that one story alone, ignoring the fact that Russia was paying bounties on the heads of our sons and daughters who were on the battlefield in defense of our great nation. I believe that all my Republican friends who have so passionately expressed their patriotism, over the decades, that they're fighting for the flag, that this is about the Constitution. I believe them. I believe they mean that. You cannot look at what this president did and the peril that he has left our children. And I say that as a mom who has a son who served in the Marines, the peril that he left our children as they tried to defend our nation. That's an easy conversation to have with someone. But if you want to look at the conservative issues of conservatism, of limited government, of cutting spending, of cutting taxes, the idea of issues of pro-life, he's crowding immigrant children into cages and leaving them without food and water, literally. I mean, we can go down the whole list of issues that have always been the core principles of conservatism, and this president does not embrace any of them. I think it's really important, to Steve's point, that this is not a judgmental conversation. People made the best decision they thought they could make in the moment in 2016, and we're in a whole different world now. We've had 3.5 years to watch this president, to watch how he does not lead. He is a weak and impotent man who falls apart in the face of strength. who thinks that leadership is copying the dictators and the tyrants around the world. And I think it's important to remember that you don't need to ask your friends and families to consider putting their name on a billboard to say they're not voting for Donald Trump. We're asking them to look in their hearts and to think carefully about the consequences of their decision. And on election day, pull a curtain behind them and just do the right thing. Quietly, privately, go into that voting booth. For this one moment in the history of our nation, we need to set aside our party loyalty, the partisanship that comes with party politics, and do the right thing for America.
Yeah. Thanks, Jennifer. Appreciate that. Let's go to David Lankowski, CJ. If David is on the call, hopefully he's made it into Zoom here. Oh, great, there he is. Hey, David, if you unmute, we should be able to hear you. In the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, there should be a mute button. You just need to click that.
Oh, you're so close, David.
I know, he's so close.
Yeah.
Hey, CJ, are you able to unmute David? If so, maybe you can help him. And if not, I'll just read his question. Okay, CJ can't unmute David, so I'm just going to read his question. What are you doing to combat the near guaranteed plan to declare that the election will have been rigged? This is something we've discussed quite a bit internally, and it sounds like a doomsday scenario, but given the fact that mail-in voting is going to take a lot longer than it would in a normal election after election day, there's a very real possibility that that Donald Trump claims that the election was rigged afterward if we don't have a very clear winner. So I'll leave that to anyone.
I'll take a first shot at that. I've been involved in 2 presidential campaigns at a very senior level. We won one, lost one, been on both sides of that concession phone call. The placing of one from John McCain to Barack Obama, and and then on the team, the receiving one with President Bush from Senator Kerry. The first person who matters that addressed Barack Obama as Mr. President-elect wasn't his staff. It was John McCain. It's the loser of an election that gives legitimacy to the winner by validating the process and the legitimacy of it, and basically under the umbrella of the idea, we'll get you next time, if we fell short. And that's part of the competitive cycle of American politics. And so Trump has long intimated that he will decry the legitimacy of any contest that doesn't return him as the winner. And of course, that's an undermining of a core democratic value and part of the illiberalism and the stench of fascistic rhetoric that abounds and surrounds the entire Trump enterprise and has for some time. The assaults of the rule of law, on the rule of law, the chance of locking up political opponents, right? All of it is appallingly illiberal. And so Donald Trump will do everything he can to undermine the legitimacy of the election. There's no question that as a country, we need to refresh the Voting Rights and Civil Rights Acts. We need to secure our elections from foreign interference. And these are all areas that Lincoln Project, I think, is going to talk more about, and much more aggressively so in the months ahead, and maybe Reed, or Rick have some to add. But right now we've been prosecuting the case against Trump, and we're beginning a prosecution against the Senate enablers. And certainly this will be a core area of interest of ours to communicate around and about to the American people as we move closer to the election over the summer. But it's an enormously concerning issue. And it is remarkable to behold this moment in time when the democratic tradition, which has been maintained through Civil War and World War and Great Depression, is under really a material threat from a party that's lost its fidelity to the concept of one man, one vote, and the person who gets the most votes wins. And part of the strategy of the party to win is to disenfranchise people from their hard-earned voting rights all over the country. When you see thousands and thousands of Black Americans confined to a single polling place, we look at some of the states, you look at Wisconsin, we're going to see chaos on election day in the country, and we're going to do everything we can to be involved in that voting rights fight as we move through the rest of the cycle.
Yeah, and let me just echo a couple of the things that Steve just said. We will very soon be in this fight directly to ensure that all Americans that want to be able to cast their ballot will be able to, whether or not that is at a polling place if they believe it's safe enough, or whether or not it is in part, as we look towards absentee balloting and mail-in voting. And so we will be in there, because from our perspective, what we're seeing now among the Republican Party is just one of the many things that is so frustrating, which is that they are now making it harder for folks to vote because they have clearly failed in the marketplace of ideas. And so now, how can we make sure that they, and we know that Trump is always about the they, cannot participate adequately or equally to ensure that our people can get elected. And what's maybe so dangerous about this whole thing is that they do it not to espouse a certain philosophy or ideology about making the country better, but for the accumulation of power and personal wealth and all of the territory that comes with those things.
CJ, let's go to Luis Rosario next. And while you're getting Luis, I want to also give Mark Barbian a heads up that we'll be going to you next, Mark. So, hey, Luis, how are you doing?
Hey, thanks, Ron. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. Thanks for being here.
Great. Thank you again. Listen, love you guys. You guys are just so great. I look forward to each new ad, and you just hit all the right buttons in Trump's mind. So thank you. As a independent in North Carolina, we hear and see what's going on. So thank you. I want to specifically point out one of your latest ads, the names ad, hitting on Trump's enablers, as Steve likes to name them. Are there plans to continue this ad and future ones like it, especially in these swing states of those senators and congressmen? I would suggest something like a Profiles in Cowardice series as a follow-up to that great names ad, and specifically targeting each of those individuals. Thank you.
Thanks, Luis. Rick, do you want to take that one?
I had no audio on that, Ron.
Oh, no. Did anybody else hear?
Yeah, we're definitely going to be continuing in those Senate races and those parts, those races where there's a chance to flip it over. And to a great idea, we're gonna have to repeat it back to Rick because he's the genius behind the ads. And we'll make sure, Rick, the caller, had a great idea of doing a Profiles in Cowardice series of ads for our senators that we're targeting. And so, yeah, absolutely. And Martha McSally and, up in Montana, and Tom Tillis, and in my neck of the woods, Susan Collins and Cory Gardner. And, and that list, by the way, gets longer and longer every day. As Trump's numbers plummet, these down ballot races are affected by that. So more and more of these races are getting closer and closer, and better targets for us as we go as well. So yeah, you can be sure that that ad that you referenced and a lot of others that are coming after it are going to be seen by a lot of voters in all of those key races.
I want to say this about the Senate races. All of us are former or current or apostate Republicans from the old days. And all of us have worked for either Republican Senate candidates or super PACs supporting them, or the national committees or state committees supporting these guys. And I'm sure I'm not the only one of the group who's heard some very, very angry people after yesterday's ad, which we called names, which I think, Ron, you could probably kick that up and show the folks that if they haven't seen it yet. It was the first time that we have gone out against not only the Republican senators who enabled Trump, who are on the ballot this time, but Republican senators who enabled Trump and are on the ballot in the next election cycle and the cycle after that. Because our mission statement was not merely to defeat Donald Trump.
Right.
It was to defeat Trump, Trumpism, and the people who enable him. So those folks have to go. They have violated their oath. They have fallen short of their stature. They now pretend that they're hostages. They now act as if they have no agency or power over their own actions. They're so afraid of a mean tweet that they refuse to stand up and take a stand for the people of their states or the people of this country against Donald Trump's depredations and his corruption and his incompetence. And so the idea that they're going to escape this situation while we have our eyes on them and while America has its eyes on them is ludicrous. And we're going to be here in this fight, and it doesn't have to make us any friends. We're all past needing to be approved or patted on the head by our old buddies in the party. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to make some things hurt a little bit this year. And the idea of profiles in cowardice, I had another word that begins in C and ends in hit regarding that. But we're going to make sure that these guys get the message loud and clear, that America watches their behavior. And as Jennifer just said, our map has expanded dramatically. When we started, it looked like we were going to be able to play in Arizona, Colorado, Maine, maybe one or two other places. Well, now the map is so large and so compelling that we're going to be in the fight in places like North Carolina. We are hopeful that we're going to raise enough money to be in the fight in South Carolina. You'll hear more about that very soon. We're going to probably be in the fight in red state Kansas, especially if it's Chris Kobach as the nominee, because we believe that the people of Kansas are not going to elect an overt racist. So we're going to be in the fight in a lot of different places.
Can I also add a couple points to that? Most targeting in a political context by a national party is done on the viability of the race as opposed to the offensiveness of the member of Congress or the Senate. And so our standard is not the viability of the race, but it's the rightness of the cause. And so we're going to be present, at the periphery of some of the Senate races where we think we might be able to put some seats on the margins into greater play and see what happens. So we're going to be aggressive as we go out and we pursue Senate targets. And then on top of Rick's point, the reality is Donald Trump couldn't have happened without the enablers who know better and have been terrified of being tweeted at. And the reality is when these senators are described as hostages, these are some of the most powerful elected officials in the country. They are vested with considerable institutional and constitutional power. They're the upper house of a co-equal branch of government, and their timidity in the face of what they would have decried such a short time ago, the surrender of all of their principles, every adherence to a concept of decency, the degradations of our politics, the desecrations of Trump's office, and they've just been completely silent about all of it. In fact, the only thing that's mustered or summoned any outrage on the part of these incumbent senators is the idea that they may soon be held accountable by this groups and the other allied groups. And we operate on a pretty simple philosophy, is that all of them, the whole group of them, bought the ticket, and now it's time to take the ride. And we're going to be very pleased to move into a very aggressive phase of the Lincoln Project as we bring the fight into the Senate races and target very directly the failures of these incumbent senators to do anything in defense of the country, whether it be the Russian bounties, whether it be the insanity and ineptitude of the COVID response, whether it be the assaults on America's allies, the destruction of civil military relations, the assaults on other vital institutions, and on the rule of law. And so the hour of accountability is here, and we look forward to being in that race. And I think you all be pleased with some of the stuff that we do in that space in the next little bit.
Yep. CJ, let's go to Mark Barbian next, if you have him ready to go. Mark, you'll just need to unmute your mic there. And
I did.
Hey, great.
We there?
Yeah.
Hey, I'm really excited to be here, and I've been a contributor all along. I love the ads. I feel really good when I see the ads, but I'm wondering, do we have confirmation that this thing is helping to swing Trump voters or that intermediate area of Trump voters back over to the Democrats or to Biden? And the second question is, I want a Lincoln Project t-shirt. Can you guys get some swag going?
We are working on that. Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yep.
Ron, you want me to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Mike.
So as I mentioned earlier on the polling side of things, it's really important to understand that the scenario when we began was extremely different.
We got an echo. Hang on 1 second. There we go.
Let me try it again.
Yep.
Yeah, it's better. So if you look at all of the polling, every single last one of them since mid-March is showing softening in the Republican base. And as I mentioned, one of the areas that has shown the biggest gap growing is the differential between college-educated Republicans and non-college educated Republicans. And the graph, and I'll be putting this up probably on Twitter a little bit after this just because the question's being asked, there's a direct correlation between the Confederate flag ad that the team puts together and this dramatic separation between college and non-college educated white voters. I can't tell you how deeply emotionally impactful that was with the Republican base. You then follow that up about 4 or 5 weeks later with the ad with our Navy SEAL calling out Donald Trump for not enforcing measures when bounties were placed on the bodies of our soldiers in uniform. And you start to see, again, even further weakening in the base, so much so that the Rasmussen poll is suggesting just 2 days ago that only 75% of Republicans will support Donald Trump in a re-election effort. This is Rasmussen. This is Trump's go-to poll. So look, there's no question there's a lot of external forces that the Lincoln Project had nothing to do with, but it's equally, I think, irrefutable that capitalizing on these trends on a daily basis and dominating the narrative the way that we have with our messaging is moving the dial considerably. And as Rick and Jennifer just pointed out, we're having a tough time on the political side of the shop, keeping up with where we need to build capacity because the map is expanded. And you always want to be a little bit hesitant and conservative and where you're going to marshal resources, but the data is the data. The numbers are the numbers. And you want to lock down that 270. That's always the goal. But as soon as we're looking at, it's hard not to make a case to build the ground game operation, in Wisconsin and in Arizona, and to kind of double down stuff in North Carolina, and to keep going into areas where we didn't realize we would have the capacity, the reach, or the political environment. And again, I don't think that there's any doubt that keep in mind, and let me wrap up with this. When we launched this back in December, Steve Bannon, right? Steve Bannon himself publicly said, if Jennifer and these guys get 3 to 4% of the Republican vote to peel off, it's game over. When Rasmussen is reporting that it's only 75%, it's 5 or 6-fold at this point in the game. So again, full qualifiers, a long way to go. But there's absolutely no way you can point to what has been happening and say that the way that we have, along with everybody else's help on this phone call, dominated the discussion, dominated the social media narrative, and gotten into the head of this president and taken him so off message that he's becoming his worst enemy.
And Ron, let me add to that just very quickly.
Yeah.
Why is President Trump coming to New Hampshire this weekend?
Yeah.
Because he needs New Hampshire to hit his 270. He knows it. The RNC knows it. And the RNC's, I got a chance to sort of, am I echoing now too?
No, it's Mike. Can you mute
Okay.
if you're not talking, Mike? Thanks. Go ahead.
I had a chance to have a little peek at the RNC data in the last few days, and their numbers are showing a sudden and widening, divide for the president in states where they thought they were going to be able to come in and do a little bit of work and win it and have him in their column. And New Hampshire is one of those states. And there's no question in my mind that it is our ability to frame the narrative and to influence the conversation amongst the American people that is in part feeding those numbers as they drop. And what I find, I guess, delightful about it all is that the RNC knows it too.
Yeah.
And Ron, just let me say this, that the
Please.
places where the president is traveling recently, Tulsa, you know, in the well-known swing state of Oklahoma, New Hampshire, which
Right.
Jennifer knows better than anybody, which is a stretch at best. I think next week or the week after, he's going to, you know, Midland, Odessa, Texas, out in the West Texas oil fields, where, you know, there are so many Democratic votes or Republican votes that he's desperately in need of. I mean, to say there's a strategy is an insult to like the idea of strategy.
Yeah. CJ, could you see if we can get Kenneth Aronsol on the line? Okay, I think we're having some trouble with Kenneth. So I'm just going to read his question, and maybe Jennifer, you might want to take the first crack at this one.
Okay.
Kenneth says, Trump says that he wants schools open in the fall, but he doesn't want it to be politicized. But it is his actions that have politicized the issue. Are you going to be looking at that issue?
Yeah, I imagine that we will. I mean, we're going to be looking at whatever issues are important to the American people as this election unfolds. I find this school issue, you know, I raised 5 kids. I have 3 grandchildren, 2 of whom are in elementary school right now. And I find the president's position on this to be unconscionable. But I also find it to be psychologically fascinating and politically fascinating as well. The president wants all of your children to go back into crowded classrooms. He wants all of you who are teachers and administrators to go into the classrooms with them. And just because, not based on any medical or scientific you know, theory or information that says it's safe to do so. But as the Republicans are planning their convention and talking about bringing crowds of people together inside an arena, more and more senators are saying, gee, I'm not going to be able to be with you inside that crowded arena with all of those potential virus carriers. I'll just chime in by video, or I'm going to stay home in my state. It's just another example of this president who is intellectually uncurious and completely narcissistic in his motivation. Opening schools was just like opening businesses, getting America back to work. He needs it so that he looks good, so that he looks strong. And the good news, I hope in other states that it's similar to New Hampshire, where we have a tremendous amount of local influence in our schools and how they function and whether or not they open and how they open. And we have a governor who's been very responsive to those concerns. I hope that's the same is true across most of the states across the country, because anything Trump says has nothing to do with the health, well-being, and education of your children. It is all about Donald Trump on Election Day.
Yeah. Hey, Reed, do you want to add anything to that? I know we talked earlier today, and for everyone listening, tomorrow we'll drop our next episode of the podcast, which will be our weekly roundup. And we talked about this morning when we were recording it, Reed. You have 2 kids who are 2 kids? What do you have?
2. Yes.
And how are you thinking about the balance between school and reopening the economy and everything that Jennifer just offered?
Well, I mean, you know, I work here in my office all day. My wife spends the vast majority of her time, or she did this spring, I should say, learning how to be a homeschool mom in the context of, you know, people being scared and freaked out and everything being done on the fly. Now, I think what we talked a little bit about earlier, Ron, is that the folks who, you know, need, you know, something like a clean, you know, safe, healthy school to send their kids to are the folks who are least likely to be able to have that happen, and B, right, the least likely to be able to afford not to be able to go to work because they have to watch their kids. And so I think the school opening piece is really just a larger, you know, attendant piece of the fact that the president did not allow the federal government to respond to the coronavirus. There has not been a coordinated federal response to this. As someone who used to work in that world many moons ago, you know, there is no other country in the history of humanity who has as many resources, money, assets, people, experts, facilities, technology, information, whatever it is, to be able to do these things. And it all sits on the shelf for the most part. And despite Dr. Fauci's best efforts, and I think, I guess we'd call it the bravery of these folks at the CDC this week to say, if you're going to go back to school, here's how you have to do it, despite obviously earning the umbrage of Trump. It's going to be a hard late summer and early fall for a lot of folks, because I think, especially if you look at places like Florida, where Rick lives, or down in Texas, where our other co-founder, John Weaver, lives, or in, Arizona, 65% of Texans said in a survey last week, they're not comfortable sending their kids back to school. And so even if they're open, how many people are going to send them? And so I think it's just, none of us, and shouldn't be surprising, none of us do well with uncertainty. And this has been certainly the most uncertain time for many of us that we can remember.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to this next question. And I don't think we're able to get Scott on the line. So I'm going to read this one as well. And CJ says he's having some Zoom issues bringing people on right now. So let me just read this, and anybody who wants to take a crack at it, feel free, because I know we spent a lot of time talking about this. But how critical is mail-in voting to the cause in light of COVID-19? And it seems that Trump supporters will have no concerns packing in long lines in crowded halls where social distancing isn't possible, and more thoughtful voters may not take the risk.
Well, we believe that mail-in voting is a vital element in this campaign. We understand the reason the president is complaining about mail-in voting and trying to scare folks about mail-in voting is because, I assure you, below the Trump level, every Republican operative in a state is running a direct mail program to get early and absentee ballots. They are pushing out requests for absentee ballots. They're going to use it. They're going to use it effectively. It is incumbent on the side of light in this equation to do the same thing, to promote it very heavily, to push it very heavily, and to ensure that we get people out to come out and vote early for Joe Biden, in part because with early voting, you don't want to end up with the last weekend of the campaign and Trump puts out that Joe Biden is a space alien who eats, an iguana every day. You don't want some craziness at the very end of the campaign that's going to upset the whole apple cart. You want to get those votes. You want to get those votes in and banked before you get to the day of the election, because Trump is a chaos artist. You want to be careful because he is a disruptor. So mail-in voting is a right. It should be a standard practice. In most states, it is a standard practice. If you're a Trump administration official, it's a standard practice. If you're Donald Trump, it's a standard practice. I encourage every American to do early and absentee voting.
Yeah. And go ahead, Jennifer, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and this kind of circles back to a question we had earlier around that from somebody, how do I talk to my Republican friends about this? That because Trump is going to do two things. He's going to take full advantage of pushing absentee ballots, and he's going to use mail-in voting as an excuse to disqualify the result of the election if he loses, right? So he's going to play both sides of that. So I think, when you're part of a conversation about mail-in voting, mail-in voting has existed forever. It's called absentee ballots. Every party, every candidate has always encouraged it. To Rick's point, there are states where they only do mail-in voting. It's 100% mail-in voting. And for my Republican friends who have fought so hard to defend the right for every ballot to be counted and the integrity of our ballots, I would remind them that our military vote by mail-in voting and always have, from around the world, from their bases, whether they're here at home or somewhere else in the world, they have always voted by mail-in vote. We have always counted those ballots. It is not a it is not a tool of corruption. It has, and many make the argument that it's actually got more integrity than other types of voting, simply because there is a person and a barcode associated with every single ballot that comes in. More secure, exactly.
Yeah, despite what the president says, and
right.
And actually, I think there were some, ironically, the president's been raging against the mail-in voting as being not a secure way to vote, and yet there's a story about Lara Trump, and I think it was Eric Trump, sending out robocalls to California voters. Mike, maybe you've heard about this, telling people to vote by mail, to send in their absentee ballots. I don't know if you care to comment, but.
Well, look, let me just say this. I've spent the better part of my career and millions and millions and millions of dollars trying to reorient Republican voters to vote by mail. And every cycle, we come up with a new way to try to do it, whether it's people going to the door to talk to them about the importance, or doing robocalls to do it, or direct mail targeting, or email targeting. It is the height of hypocrisy. The truth of the matter is, scientifically, we know that absentee ballots don't favor either party, but if they do, it actually benefits Republicans slightly. And the reason why that's important is, to Jennifer's point, this is not about voting. It's about undermining confidence in the vote itself. It's about undermining the democratic, with a small d, democratic system. He is trying to he's trying to sow the seeds of discord, so that if the outcome is not what he wants, he can point to some boogeyman behind the tree and say, that's what it was. I told you this was coming. They stole the election from me. That's what this is all about.
Steve, I think you were trying to say something earlier, but you were on mute.
I just think it's important to remember that nobody can stop anyone from voting. They can make it more difficult. They can make it a pain in the ass. But they can't stop anybody from voting. And so that's the important and the key piece. And so voting early, voting by mail is an important way to think about having to make sure your voice is heard.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess the short answer to Scott's question, which is how critical is it? It is very critical, and there are things that you can do now to find out how to vote by mail where you live. If you're in a state that doesn't already have mail-in voting and you're implementing mail-in voting because of the coronavirus pandemic, you can call your Secretary of State's office, you can call your Board of Elections, you can call your county clerk's office. There is an election authority that oversees the implementation of absentee ballots, of vote by mail, in the jurisdiction where you live, and they answer to you. And if you're not sure yet what the plans are, you can call them and ask them what their plans are to make sure that everybody—
Hey, Ron, can we put up a page that has links to that information?
Yes, yeah, we'll do that.
That would be great.
And also, we're going to follow up with an email to everybody who participated on this call as well, with some other stuff. So we'll put some information in that email as well. Yeah, great idea. Okay, so CJ's having some difficulty with Zoom in bringing people on live to ask their questions, so I'm going to read some more of these. And the next one is John Jaskin. And John read an opinion piece in the New York Times suggesting that Biden shouldn't agree to debate unless Trump releases his taxes. And I don't know if John is aware that we just got two opinions from the Supreme Court this morning on the tax cases, and his question is, any real possibility that this would happen?
No.
Who wants to first?
Well, I'm going to jump in.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's important that it not happen. Donald Trump needs to be confronted and defeated, which means that Vice President Biden, which he's more than capable of doing, is going to need to face Donald Trump on behalf of the forces of decency and constitutionalism in this country, on behalf of the living presidents and the presidents that have passed, and the founding fathers, and all the people who have sacrificed and shown fidelity to the American Republic. He needs to stand there on the stage and confront Trump, the most incompetent and inept president in American history, who has brought mass death, economic collapse, and weakness to this country. And Vice President needs to look him dead in the eye and call him out. Communicate to the American people who he is and what he is, and to lay out the bill after 3.5 years of this insanity and degradation to our country and to our system. And so I look forward to the moment of confrontation. And I think Donald Trump is fairly coherent when he speaks. I think he's physically in decline, mentally addled. His performance is clearly declining when you look at it. So I look forward to the vice president getting a clear shot at him in the fall. It's going to be an important moment, cleansing moment for the country, when we get to shine a spotlight on all the foolishness and insanity and incompetence and bluster and idiocy and imbecility that we've been subjected to as a nation for these last years. And we'll get to stark relief, a good man versus a bad man, competent man versus an incompetent man, honorable man versus a dishonorable man. I think it's going to be great for the country.
So, Ron, I have a little bit simpler take,
Please
slightly
do.
off from Steve's, is that Donald Trump is going to say some crazy things. And if I were Joe Biden, I'd be like, ladies and gentlemen, the current president of the United States.
No, I think Donald Trump was able to use his looming physicality over Hillary Clinton in that debate.
Yeah.
In those debates in 2016 to try to intimidate her, to try to get in her physical space. But I think Donald Trump has a real problem coming forward. I think Steve's right. Joe Biden he's not new to this rodeo. He's been around the block a few times. He's done debates. He just survived something like 684,000 Democratic Party debates when, he was counted out time and again and kept springing back up. So I think he's going to be able to go into those debates. I think he's going to have an accounting, as Steve said, of what's happened in this country under Donald Trump's watch. And I think he's not going to put up with any of Donald Trump's games and crap. And he shouldn't. Joe Biden is healthier. He's thinner. He's a better leader. He's in better shape than Donald Trump. Those are things that Donald Trump really gets messed up about. Yeah. And this idea that Joe Biden is in some way better than him will eat at Trump. It will chew at him. And he knows he's a better man. He knows he's a guy who's more fit and ready to lead this country. So it is going to be a hell of a time for Trump to play the games he played with Hillary in the course of this debate.
Yeah, Ron, what Joe Biden is smarter than Donald Trump. That's what Donald Trump can't stand. Joe Biden is smarter than he is. The person who is declining to participate in debate that's always a losing position. You never want to be that person. I think it's more likely that Donald Trump is going to be looking for excuses not to debate and reasons not to be on stage side by side with the clearly superior candidate, rather than the other way around.
Joe Biden's a Pennsylvania guy. I've spent a lot of years in Wilmington, in that area. I went to the University of Delaware. Joe Biden knows what to do here. How Joe Biden grew up. He knows proverbially he needs to go out and knock Donald Trump on his ass on the debate stage. And I have no doubt that's exactly what he's going to do.
Yeah, and just to be clear, there've been a handful of questions already in here about whether or not the Lincoln Project endorses Joe Biden, and we've done that formally with an ad, and then with another one that we just launched. I think it's kind of a blur now. Was it last week or the week?
Last week, which is somewhere like 370,000 days ago. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, or 16 ads ago. I can't keep track. So the answer is yes, we have. And so there's one, I think we have time for one last question here, because we're coming up on time. John Bernath asks, what are you doing to counter the lies in GOP ads? And I just want to add on to that and Rick, maybe you can talk a little bit about this too. It seems to be a feature of the Trump presidency, the volume of lies that continue to come not just from his own mouth, from the administration, but it almost seems to be intentional because it is so overwhelming. And so the effect that it has on voters and people who are trying to make good sense of the information coming at them is that they are exhausted.
Well, and that is the purpose, Ron. That is the purpose of the fire hose of lies, the Niagara Falls of mendacity. That is the reason he does it. He wants to wear you down so you're just sick of chasing the truth. And one of the things we try to do with the Lincoln Project is strip it down to its essential argument. To reduce this down, as a team, we're communicating at all different levels, from the political side to the earned media side to the social side to the video side. The simple core messages. Donald Trump has failed this country. He is a weak, bad man. He is unable and incompetent. He is impotent when it comes to foreign powers seeking to destroy us. He is unable to fulfill any of the most basic obligations of the presidency, and we tell the truth about it. We don't decorate it. We did an ad that a lot of folks saw called Morning in America. We went to the facts, and the facts against Donald Trump are devastating. We've got almost 150,000 Americans have died because of this man's indifference and incompetence. We've got an economic disaster in this country that is going to be with us for decades because of this man's incompetence. And those facts have a weight of their own politically. Yeah. And so you ignore and we brush past Donald Trump's just constant mendacity. You just have to. You cannot let him wear you down. You have to make sure you understand the core facts. We hope we're doing a good job of giving people ammunition in these conversations with folks. Look, a lot of Republicans come to me and say, listen, I'm not with Trump anymore. How do I talk to my friends about it? Well, the kind of media we're doing, the kind of communication we're doing is meant to help you do that. It is to strip it down to the essentials. It is to cut it down, peel away all the decoration, all the ideology. It's just a question. Do you want a man who is incompetent, corrupt, venal, and who is cruel as a matter of practice, or do you want a decent man? You may disagree with Joe Biden on policy matters, but at your heart, when you see the facts stacked up one against the other, you know that Donald Trump is the worst possible choice in this election.
Yeah. Okay, we're just coming up on time, and before Steve, I go to you to close us out with some final remarks. I just want to make a couple of quick announcements. So, if you are watching this live stream and you're not already on our email list, what we'd like you to do tonight is go to our website, lincolnproject.us, and sign up, because we're going to be doing more of these. And if you're on our email list, you'll have the first crack at RSVPing and getting into the Zoom, which, as we know, is probably going to max out every time that we do this. And we'd love to hear from as many of you as we can, and we need your support. Also, we'll be sending an email after this event to everybody who signs up today, sometime before midnight, with a special offer for a hat or a mug, a Lincoln Project hat and a mug. And I know a lot of folks have been asking for merchandise, and we're working on that. We'll be making it available publicly soon, but right now we're just offering it to folks who are on our email list. So if you're interested in that, that's another reason to sign up right now. We will be doing more of these very soon, so keep an eye out for an invitation, and we can't wait to see you on the next one. So Steve, could you land the plane for us and wish everyone a good night?
I sure will, Ron. Thank you. First off, thank you all for joining us tonight and for your support. And if I could just for a second share a story. I think sometimes when you think about American history, it's very difficult to separate it from the concepts of fate and destiny and providence's blessings, that in each moment of testing and crisis in the nation's history, the right men and women have been put forward, have emerged, like I said, sometimes almost providentially, to be stewards of the nation's fate in the dark hours on the stormy seas. Dwight Eisenhower was a colonel in the United States Army in 1938. He hadn't been promoted, I believe, in 14 years. Harry Truman was an underestimated senator from Missouri. Harriet Tubman, who should be on the $20 bill, an escaped slave and a giant of the Republic. That you think about the story of America, think about what William Tecumseh Sherman said about Abraham Lincoln after his death. Sherman, a colonel in the Union Army at the beginning of the war, saw his first action at Bull Run, was very skeptical of Lincoln when he was elected. And he basically thought of him as a backwoods barbarian who had no capacities to lead the Union through the hour of crisis. He was pessimistic. He thought the country was doomed. He last saw Lincoln with Grant at the City Point Union Army headquarters at the headwaters of the James River. And the war was nearly over, and Lincoln instructed him and Grant that they were to attend to military matters, to leave the politics to him. And recalling Lincoln after that meeting, which was the last time he saw him, Sherman remarked, he said that he had met all of the great men of the world, the kings and the emperors, but he had never met any man who combined more of the qualities of greatness and goodness than Abraham Lincoln. And I think about that in the context of this moment in Joe Biden's life, a 77-year-old man who was elected to the United States Senate in 1972 when he was 29 years of age. He was too young to take the oath of office with the other senators, who tragically lost his family as a young man in his early 30s, someone who we have seen suffer in public, someone we have seen maintain his dignity through suffering, a good man who loves this country, who loves his fellow American, whether or not they're his voters or not, someone who can reach out and put his arm around a grieving person and look them in the eye and have been there. And you think about the qualities that are needed in this hour for our country and the qualities that will be needed to begin to carve out a path of reconciliation and forgiveness in the spirit of what Lincoln talked about in the second inaugural. And you think about Joe Biden now preparing in these final 100 days before the election to meet his destiny as the 45th president of the United States. Excuse me, the 46th president of the United States, the 45th man to hold the title, to take the oath of office. And we're just all privileged to be involved in an effort to support that good man with all of our groups that we're affiliated with and allied with, to fight for what is right in this country and the preservation of the constitutional union, which is all of our birthright and also all of our obligations to steward and to pass on to our children and their children, and to maintain and continue the American story for as far as we can imagine into the future. So it's a real pleasure to be with you tonight. It's a real pleasure to be part of this fight with all of you. And we have a lot of work to do over the next 100 days. We look forward to getting to it and in making a difference as we fight to get Donald Trump out of an office that he's desecrated and has no business holding. Thank you very much.
Thanks everybody for joining, and we'll see you again soon. Good night.